It was a moonless night when I left work, the clock ticking past midnight as I navigated the winding roads that led to my house. The darkness was thick, clinging to the world like a shroud, broken only by the feeble glow of my car's headlights. I had taken this route countless times, but that night, it felt different, as if the shadows held secrets waiting to be unveiled. As I approached a particularly desolate stretch of road, my unease grew. The isolation weighed on me, and my grip on the steering wheel tightened. I tried to shake off the foreboding feeling that had settled in my chest when suddenly, out of the obsidian abyss, a shape emerged. In the middle of the road stood a clown of colossal stature, a grotesque figure that seemed out of place in the dead of night. His oversized frame was cloaked in a tattered blood-red costume, and his face was concealed beneath a mask of white, except for a twisted, manic grin that seemed painted on. I slammed the brakes, my heart pounding in my chest. Panic surged through me as I skidded to a stop just inches from the towering, sinister clown. His presence was unsettling, to say the least, and I couldn't fathom what compelled someone to don such a menacing guise at this hour, in this forsaken place. With trembling hands, I maneuvered my car around the clown, who remained eerily still. His eyes, hidden behind the mask, bore into mine with a malevolence that sent shivers down my spine. I drove away, but the encounter lingered in my thoughts like a sinister specter. When I reached home, I couldn't help but replay the disturbing scene in my mind. Who was that clown? And what sinister purpose could he have for standing in the middle of the road at such an ungodly hour? My imagination conjured countless ominous possibilities, and sleep eluded me that night. The following day, I reluctantly set out for work, hoping that the night's bizarre encounter had been nothing more than a twisted illusion. But as I approached the same desolate road on my way home, my heart sank. There, in the dim glow of twilight, stood the same malevolent clown. This time, he was different. He moved deliberately toward my car, long, exaggerated strides eating up the distance between us. Fear clutched my heart as I slammed my foot on the gas pedal, my tires screeching in reverse. The clown's grin widened as he closed in on my car, his intentions now undeniably sinister. Panic coursed through me, and I swerved the car around, nearly colliding with the roadside. My heart pounded in my chest as I sped away. The image of the approaching clown seared into my memory. I drove straight to the police station, my voice trembling as I recounted the unnerving encounters with the clown. The officers listened intently, their expressions a mixture of concern and skepticism. They assured me they would send a patrol car to investigate. The next day, the call came from the police, but it brought no comfort. They informed me that when they arrived at the spot, the road was empty, devoid of any trace of the menacing clown. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. Dread continued to shadow my every step, and my nights were plagued by nightmares of the towering clown with his ghostly grin. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this enigmatic figure than met the eye. What sinister purpose did he serve, and why had he singled me out? As time passed, the memory of the midnight clown faded, but the terror he had instilled in me remained. I couldn't escape the chilling realization that some horrors are inexplicable, lurking just beyond the veil of the ordinary, waiting to surface when you least expect them. The road I once traveled with ease had become a dark and treacherous path, haunted by the specter of the midnight clown, a memory that would continue to haunt me for the rest of my days. Months went by, and I tried to push the memory of the midnight clown to the deepest corners of my mind. Life returned to a semblance of normalcy, but an unshakable unease lingered like a lingering fog. The clown remained an enigma, a riddle without answers, and I couldn't escape the feeling that I had witnessed something beyond the realm of the ordinary. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the world was bathed in a twilight hue, I decided to confront the mystery that had haunted me for so long. Armed with a sense of dread and determination, I drove back to that forsaken road, the same road where I had twice encountered the ominous clown. The air was thick with tension as I parked my car on the roadside, my pulse quickening with each passing moment. I peered into the growing darkness, straining to see any sign of the clown. The wind whispered secrets in the trees, and the silence was oppressive. And then there it was, emerging from the shadows with a haunting grace. The midnight clown, his towering figure once again standing in the middle of the road. This time, there was no hesitation. I had to confront this malevolent specter and unravel the truth behind his sinister presence. As I approached him cautiously, I noticed that his grin was more sinister than ever, a ghastly Cheshire smile that seemed to defy the laws of reality. His eyes gleamed with a malevolent intelligence that sent chills down my spine. I demanded answers, my voice quivering with fear and anger. "Why are you doing this?" I implored. "What do you want from me?" The clown's response was a raspy, unnatural whisper that sent shivers through my soul. "I am the harbinger of your deepest fears, a reflection of the darkness within you. I exist to remind you that the line between reality and nightmare is thinner than you think." I stumbled back, my mind reeling from the cryptic response. It was as if the clown was an embodiment of my own inner demons, a manifestation of the fears that had haunted my subconscious. But that didn't explain the physical presence, the menacing pursuit. Before I could gather my thoughts, the clown took another step forward, and the ground seemed to shift beneath me. Panic surged as I realized I was trapped in a nightmare of my own making. The clown's form twisted and contorted, its grotesque features distorting with each passing second. With a sudden, jarring sensation, I found myself back in my car, gripping the steering wheel with white-knuckled intensity. It was as if the encounter with the clown had been a surreal dream, a phantasmagoria of my own making. The road was empty, devoid of any trace of the menacing figure. Had it all been a manifestation of my own fears, a hallucination born from the depths of my mind? I couldn't be sure, but one thing was certain. The memory of the midnight clown would haunt me for the rest of my days, a reminder that the boundary between reality and nightmare is a fragile and treacherous one. As I drove away from that desolate road, I couldn't escape the feeling that the clown's cryptic words held a deeper truth. Perhaps it wasn't just my own fears that had conjured this enigmatic figure. Perhaps the darkness that lurked within us all was a force more potent and insidious than we could ever imagine, waiting to surface when we least expected it, and reminding us that the true terrors of the world often reside within ourselves. As I finally pulled into my driveway, the events of that eerie encounter with the midnight clown continued to haunt me. I was determined to put it all behind me, to convince myself that it had been a manifestation of my own fears, a hallucination brought on by exhaustion and stress. But as I stepped into my dimly lit living room, the shadows seemed to dance with malevolent glee, and my unease deepened. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong, that the boundaries between reality and nightmare had blurred beyond recognition. Just as I was about to pour myself a glass of water, my phone rang, shattering the uneasy silence. I answered it with trembling hands, my voice barely a whisper. "Hello," I stammered. "Hello, Arthur," a voice on the other end replied calmly. "I'm Dr. Henry. I'm calling to check on you after your last visit, to ensure you're still taking your medications." I felt a cold sweat bead on my forehead. How did this doctor know my name? My mind raced with confusion and fear. "Yes, of course," I stammered, my voice quivering. "I'm taking my medications as prescribed." There was a pause on the other end, and then Dr. Henry continued in a measured tone. "I received a call from the police today, Arthur. They told me a rather disturbing story about a clown encounter that happened to you." Dread clutched at my heart as I remembered the sinister clown from the road. How could the police know about that? I hadn't reported it to anyone other than the police themselves. "We don't want to go back to square one," Dr. Henry continued. "The sanatorium pharmacy informed me that you haven't picked up your medications for the past 2 months." I felt my world crumble around me. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, and the horrifying truth began to dawn on me. The clown, the unsettling encounters, the hallucinations, they were all part of a nightmarish spiral, a descent into madness that I had been unable to recognize. I swallowed hard, struggling to find words that made sense. "Doctor, I didn't realize. I thought I was fine. I thought I was getting better." Dr. Henry's voice softened, tinged with concern. "Arthur, it's crucial that you come back to the sanatorium immediately. We need to reassess your treatment and ensure your well-being. We can't let these hallucinations persist." As I hung up the phone, a chilling realization washed over me like a tidal wave. The midnight clown, the sinister encounters, and the phone call from Dr. Henry were all pieces of a disturbing puzzle. I had been living a nightmare of my own creation, trapped in the labyrinth of my mind, where the line between reality and hallucination had blurred beyond recognition. As I prepared to return to the sanatorium, the world around me seemed to waver and distort, and I couldn't help but wonder how many other horrors lurked within the recesses of my own consciousness, waiting to surface when I least expected them. The most terrifying revelation of all was that the true terror resided within me, a darkness that I couldn't escape, a darkness that had swallowed me whole. In a small town called Sanford, there was a small circus, and within it, there was a clown named Jackson. Jackson was a peculiar-looking individual with a face marred by deformities and scars. His eyes were of different colors, and his face bore the marks of past burns. Because of his grotesque appearance, people would mock and ridicule him during his performances at the circus. During each show, the audience would throw food and objects at him, subjecting him to ridicule and scorn. However, Jackson would put on a smile and deliver his acts professionally, despite his personal suffering. But this torment continued for years, and Jackson began to feel isolated and fell into depression. He had no friends or family, living alone in a small house. His depression deepened to the point where he could no longer bear it. One day, he decided to end his suffering and his life, choosing suicide as the way out. He ended up in his small room, hanging himself from the ceiling fan, wearing the clown costume he used in his performances. Instead of his usual smile, a sad smile adorned his face. Weeks passed without his body being discovered, but a foul odor began emanating from his house. Rumors spread among the neighbors about the stench of the decomposing body, but no one bothered to investigate until 2 weeks later. One brave neighbor finally decided to check the source of the smell. He entered Jackson's home and made a horrifying discovery. He found Jackson's body hanging from the ceiling fan, his grotesque face smeared with food and filth, and the stench was unbearable. The police were called, and Jackson was buried in silence, and calm returned to the town. However, this calm was short-lived, as a mysterious series of murders began to haunt the town. Entire families disappeared without a trace, and children went missing under mysterious circumstances. The town lived in constant fear, with missing persons posters covering its walls. The police decided to summon a seasoned detective named Tyler Duncan to investigate these horrifying cases. Duncan arrived in the town and began gathering information and evidence, but he found himself entangled in an unsolvable mystery. He needed an explanation for these horrific events, and the only clue he had was the story of the clown Jackson. Duncan attempted several times to obtain permission from the police to enter Jackson's abandoned home, but to no avail. One night, he decided to break into the house himself. He arrived at the place and forcefully broke the door, conducting his search without legal authorization. There was a basement beneath the house, emitting an indescribable stench. Duncan reluctantly descended into the basement, where he made a horrifying discovery. He found a vast number of bodies hanging and gruesomely mutilated, their faces smeared with food and blood, as if they had been tortured and humiliated before their deaths. Duncan stood in terror and awe before this horrifying scene. How could such things happen in a previously peaceful place? There was no logical explanation, but what particularly caught his attention was the sad smile adorning the faces of all the victims, just like Jackson's smile. Duncan began collecting evidence and conducting investigations, but he could not determine the identity of the killer. There were no witnesses to the crimes, and the evidence was insufficient to reveal the perpetrator. The case was registered against an unknown person, and fear and terror spread throughout the town. After a short while, many residents decided to leave the town, abandoning it to become a ghost town. The town was sealed off, access was prohibited, and only a few brave souls remained, forming small groups to survive. Jackson's town had become a cursed place, where it seemed that Jackson's ghost sought revenge against its former inhabitants. Despite Detective Duncan's tremendous efforts, he could not uncover the identity of the unknown killer. Thus, the town of Sanford descended into complete darkness, filled with ghosts and cursed spirits. Empty streets produced eerie sounds at night, and abandoned houses whispered in hushed voices. It became a town filled with time-locked mysteries waiting to be unraveled. And so, the story of the clown, Jackson, and his tragic demise lingered in the minds of Sanford's residents, a tale of injustice, bullying, and the terrible consequences it could unleash. To this day, the mystery continues to shroud this terrifying story, perhaps forever unsolvable in our world.